A C-130 cargo plane lands in Baghdad, May 2003. Inside, no soldiers, no weapons, just shrink-wrapped pallets of $100 bills, $12 billion, 363 tons of cash, no manifest, no receipts, no records. You were told this was about freedom. You were told this was about weapons of mass destruction. By the end of this video, you will see what it actually was, the largest cash heist in human history. And you paid for it. Let me show you how it worked. When that C-130 touched down, it was carrying more than currency. It was carrying the blueprint of a mechanism you were never supposed to understand. Here is the first number you need to remember. $12 billion in physical cash flown into Iraq between 2003 and 2004. Not digital transfers, not bank wires, actual banknotes, vacuum sealed and loaded onto military aircraft. Picture this. A single pallet holds approximately $100 million in $100 bills. That means 120 pallets, each weighing over 3 tons, loaded into cargo planes, one after another, flying into a war zone. This was not emergency relief. This was not humanitarian aid. This was raw cash, moving into a country with no functioning banks, no oversight, no accountability infrastructure. Here's the second number. 6.6 billion of that cash completely vanished. Some sources say 9 billion. Either way, it is gone. No audit trail. No investigation that led anywhere. The Special Inspector General for Iraq Reconstruction, Stuart Bowen, called it potentially the largest theft of funds in national history. Think about that scale. $9 billion. If you stacked it in $100 bills, it would reach over 6 miles high. That much money does not evaporate. It does not get misplaced in accounting errors. You do not accidentally lose $6 billion. You architect it. This was not chaos. This was design. To understand the design, you need to understand the timing. The invasion began in March 2003. By May, Paul Bremer arrived as head of the Coalition Provisional Authority. Bremer was not a military man. He was a businessman, former managing director at Kissinger Associates, a consultant. He arrived with a briefcase and a plan. On May 16, 2003, Bremer signed Order Number 1, debathification. It dissolved the entire government infrastructure overnight. Thousands of civil servants, teachers, engineers, bureaucrats fired. Anyone who had been a member of the Ba'ath Party above a certain rank was permanently banned from public service. In one signature, he eliminated institutional memory. The people who knew how to run water treatment plants, electrical grids, hospitals, gone. 7 days later, May 23, 2003, he signed Order Number 2, dissolution of the Iraqi military. 400,000 trained soldiers, unemployed in an instant. Men with military training, weapons knowledge, and no paycheck. The official justification was that these institutions were loyal to Saddam Hussein and could not be trusted. But think about the consequence. You just dismantled the only 2 structures capable of providing security and basic services. You created a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. This was not incompetence, this was deliberate destruction of institutional capacity. Because here is what happened next. With no police, no army, no civil administration, Iraq descended into chaos, looting, insurgency, sectarian violence. And who stepped in to fill that gap? Private contractors. You create a security vacuum, then you sell the solution. Within months, private military contractors flooded in. Blackwater DynCorp, Triple Canopy, Aegis, Aranis. Companies you had never heard of suddenly billing the U.S. government millions per month. Blackwater alone grew from a small North Carolina training facility to a private army operating in multiple countries. By 2007, they had over 1,000 personnel in Iraq, billing over $1 billion in contracts. But here's the economics of privatization. A U.S. soldier costs the government approximately $70,000 per year in salary and benefits. A private contractor doing the same job, $300,000 to over $600,000 per year. Why would the government pay 4 to 8 times more for the same service? Because the cost is not the point. The transfer is the point. And when you pay a soldier, that money goes to an individual. When you pay a contractor, that money goes to a corporation. Corporations have shareholders. Shareholders demand returns. Returns come from revenue. Revenue comes from contracts. The longer the chaos, the longer the contracts, the longer the need for private security, private logistics, private reconstruction. The war was privatized. And privatization is always more expensive than public operation. That was the point. The chaos was the product. Security was the price tag. But where did the money come from? You, the American taxpayer. The war cost $3 trillion, not million, trillion. That number comes from a study by Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz and Linda Bilmes. They calculated direct costs, long-term veteran care, interest on borrowed money, economic opportunity cost. $3 trillion added to the national debt. To put that in perspective, $3 trillion is more than the entire GDP of the United Kingdom. It is enough to give every American citizen $10,000 in cash. Instead, it went into a war. When a government borrows, it issues bonds. Treasury bonds. Buyers include banks, foreign governments like China and Japan, pension funds, insurance companies. The government promises to pay them back with interest. But the government does not generate revenue like a business. It does not sell products. It extracts revenue through taxation and prints currency through the Federal Reserve. So when the U.S. borrowed $3 trillion for Iraq, it was not borrowing from some abstract entity. It was borrowing from future taxpayers, from you, from your children, from generations not yet born. Every dollar borrowed is a dollar that must be repaid with interest through future taxation or currency dilution. But here is the key. The borrowed money does not flow evenly. This is where the mechanism becomes visible. There is an economic concept called the Cantillon effect, named after Richard Cantillon, an 18th century economist. It describes what happens when new money enters a system. Whoever gets the money first benefits most. They can spend it before prices rise. Whoever gets it last suffers inflation without the gain. By the time the money reaches them, prices have already adjusted upward. In Iraq, who got the money first? Defense contractors, Halliburton, KBR, Bechtel, private security firms, oil service companies, logistics providers. These companies received contracts worth billions. They hired workers, bought equipment, expanded operations. They got the fresh money when it still had full purchasing power. Who got it last? Soldiers on the ground, earning standard military salaries. Iraqi civilians trying to rebuild in a collapsed economy. American taxpayers who will spend decades paying down debt through taxes and inflation. The people closest to the spigot got rich. The people furthest away paid the bill. This is not a flaw of the system. This is the system. Look at Halliburton. In 2003, their revenue was around $16 billion. By 2005, it was $21 billion. Their stock price doubled. Dick Cheney, the vice president who helped architect the war, was former CEO of Halliburton. He still held stock options when the invasion began. Conflict of interest? Only if you think the interest was supposed to be public. Now go back to that $12 billion in cash. Why cash? Why not electronic transfers, which are traceable, auditable, efficient? Because traceability was the enemy. Cash has one beautiful property for those who want to steal. It is fungible and untraceable. Once it leaves the pallet, it is impossible to follow. A digital transfer leaves a record. A wire has a sender and receiver. But cash? Cash just moves. The official story was that Iraq's banking system was destroyed, so cash was needed to pay civil servants, fund reconstruction, restart the economy. But here's what actually happened. The cash arrived on pallets. It was stored in compounds with minimal security. In some cases, it was kept in unguarded rooms. It was distributed to local contractors and officials with no invoices, no receipts, no oversight. Entire pallets disappeared, literally, shrink wrap and all. When auditors arrived years later, they found missing money, falsified documents, and contracts awarded to shell companies that did not exist. Companies with no employees, no office, no history, just a name on paper and a bank account. One contractor received a duffel bag containing $2 million in cash. He was told to spend it on community projects, no accounting required, no follow-up, just spend it. Another case involved a courier who was handed nearly $12 million in cash, told to deliver it, and then it vanished. No one knew who received it. No one asked. In one compound, auditors found that over $800 million in cash had been distributed with no documentation whatsoever. Not a single receipt. This was not a bug. This was a feature. The chaos was cover. The missing billions were not lost. They were transferred. Let me show you the pattern, because this is not new. This is old, ancient even. Rome did this. When Roman generals conquered new territories, they looted the wealth and brought it back to Rome. Gold, silver, slaves, land. They called it tribute. It funded the empire and enriched the generals. Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul made him the richest man in Rome. The war paid for itself, if you were Caesar. Venice did this. Venetian merchant fleets financed wars to secure trade routes. The wars were expensive, but the contracts and monopolies that followed were worth far more. Control the route, control the profit. The Venetian state borrowed money to fund wars, then paid back creditors with the revenue from newly secured trade. The public took the risk. The merchants took the reward. The British Empire did this. Colonial wars were funded by British taxpayers, but the profits from rubber, tea, spices, opium flowed to private trading companies like the East India Company. Socialize the cost, privatize the profit. Empires always create pretexts to transfer resources from the periphery to the core. The language changes. Democracy, civilization, freedom. But the math stays the same. Extract wealth from outside, distribute it to insiders, charge the public for the operation. In 2003, the pretext was weapons of mass destruction. Remember Colin Powell at the United Nations, February 5th, 2003. He stood before the Security Council, behind him satellite images, in his hand a vial. He claimed Iraq had mobile biological weapons labs. He claimed stockpiles of anthrax. He claimed certainty. He said, quote, My colleagues, every statement I make today is backed up by sources, solid sources. These are not assertions. What we are giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence. The speech was watched by millions. It was convincing, authoritative. Powell was trusted, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a general, a man of honor. But there were no weapons. The intelligence was fabricated. The sources were unreliable. One key source, codenamed Curveball, was later revealed to be a fabricator. German intelligence warned the U.S. that he was not credible. The warning was ignored. Powell later called it a permanent blot on his record. But by the time the truth came out, the invasion was complete. The contracts were signed. The cash was already flowing. The marketing campaign worked. The product was delivered. And here's the thing about marketing. You do not need the product to be real. You just need people to believe it is real long enough to make the purchase. On May 1st, 2003, President Bush landed on the USS Abraham Lincoln. He emerged from a fighter jet in full flight gear. Behind him, a banner, mission accomplished. He declared, quote, "Major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed." It was a photo op, a victory lap. The war was over. Except it was not. Not even close. The insurgency was just beginning. The sectarian violence, the IEDs, the suicide bombings. The war would continue for nearly another 9 years, officially. And even after U.S. troops withdrew in 2011, the instability continued. ISIS rose from the ashes of the chaos. But here's the question. If the mission was accomplished in May 2003, why did the war continue? Because the war was never about winning in the traditional sense. It was about duration. The longer the instability, the longer the contracts, the longer the need for private security, reconstruction, logistics. Perpetual war is more profitable than victory. Look at the numbers. In 2003, Halliburton's KBR division had contracts worth hundreds of millions. By 2008, over 20 billion. That is not a typo, 20 billion. Blackwater went from a small training facility to a private army billing the U.S. government over $1 billion. Bechtel, the construction giant, received contracts worth over $2 billion for reconstruction. How much was actually rebuilt? Iraq's electrical grid, water systems, and infrastructure remained broken years later. These companies did not profit despite the chaos. They profited because of it. And who paid? You did. Through debt that compounds with interest, through inflation that erodes purchasing power, through taxes that fund bond repayments decades later. The bill is still being paid. Right now, here is the final balance sheet. 4,400 American soldiers dead, over 32,000 wounded, many with traumatic brain injuries, PTSD, amputations. The cost of their long-term care is included in that $3 trillion figure. Over 100,000 Iraqi civilians dead. Some estimates go much higher. Entire cities destroyed. Fallujah, Ramadi, Mosul. $3 trillion in costs. And for what? No weapons of mass destruction were found. Iraq did not become a stable democracy. The region destabilized further, giving rise to new extremist groups. Al-Qaeda in Iraq became ISIS. The violence spilled into Syria. The refugee crisis destabilized Europe. But someone won. Defense contractors posted record profits. Oil service companies locked in long-term agreements. Private equity firms bought up distressed assets in the chaos. The public was sold security. What they received was debt. You think the war is over? It is not. Every time you see inflation rise, remember that $3 trillion was borrowed and spent. That money diluted the currency. It expanded the money supply without expanding the productive capacity of the economy. The result is inflation. It devalued your savings. Every time you pay taxes, a portion goes to service the debt from that war. Interest payments on bonds issued 15 years ago. In 2020, the U.S. paid over $300 billion just in interest on the national debt. A chunk of that traces back to Iraq. The $12 billion in cash that disappeared, that was just the most visible part. The real theft was structural. It was the conversion of public wealth into private profit, using war as the mechanism. This is not ancient history. This is the blueprint. It has been used before. It will be used again. Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. Every intervention follows the same pattern. Create instability, privatize the solution, socialize the cost. History does not repeat, but it rhymes. And if you know the rhythm, you can hear it coming. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to show you where to look. Follow the money. Always follow the money. The answers are not hidden. They are just inconvenient. The cash did not vanish into thin air. It went into pockets, offshore accounts, shell companies, real estate in Dubai, villas on the French Riviera. The soldiers who carried those pallets off the planes, they are not rich. The taxpayers who funded the operation, they are not rich. But someone got rich, and they are counting on you not to ask who. If this changed how you see the world, subscribe. If you think someone else needs to see this, share it. And if you want to support this kind of research, links are below. History keeps the receipts. I just show you where they are buried. See you in the next one.